Good afternoon. Welcome back to the B&H Event Space. You are tuned into the Passionate Photographer Critiques, brought to you by LaCie. And for that, I would like to welcome Steve Simon to the program, the passionate photographer himself. Steve, how's it going?
It's going great, Derek. Great to be here again, as usual. I don't take it for granted. I love talking about the photographs that are submitted. We get a lot of great ones, and I'm looking forward to today's critique.
Likewise, we've been on a tear lately. We've been having a lot of great submissions. So let's keep the momentum going. I'll turn it over to you to get things started here. And I will remind everybody before we get started, you can always submit by sending your photos in. We try to cap it at 3, but we love submissions. So at the end of the day, just send your pictures, and it's a great spot to have your photos critiqued anonymously. You can get the information for this by heading over to the B&H Event Space website and just click on one of the passionate photographer critiques that we have upcoming, and it'll give you all the information right there for submitting your images. But Steve,
Okay,
I'm
I
going to
will
turn it
share my
over to you.
screen as soon as Danny, the sort of master of the live stream, will let me. I think it was, oh, here, I think I can do it now. Great. Thank you, Danny.
There we
Appreciate
go.
that. Oops, too much information there. All right, let's start off. We can edit that other stuff out in post with the critique. And today I thought we'd start off with a few kind of human images. I mean, not that all the great images are not human, either taken by humans or involve humans in the content. But some of the first few images are not really, I would say, portraits, but certainly isolations of some people. And they're all different. And we can talk about sort of the pros and cons, what's working and what's not. So let's start off with a flying leap and look at this image of this beautiful dancer who is up in the air, captured at a very fast shutter speed. I'm imagining she's right there. And I think, looking at the image, I'm really intrigued. I sort of lean back a little just because my camera's in the way. I'm just going to move it slightly. But I'm looking at the shadow, and look at the shadow here. The shadow is so graceful and really kind of interesting. In some ways, I'm almost compelled to kind of, flip that thing upside down and look at the shadow here, because the shadow looks like a different picture. Um, Very kind of interesting to see. She's got a very sort of self-conscious look. Obviously, she knows she's being photographed. Looks like it's in Cuba, a place I'm very familiar with. Certainly, you can tell from those old cars that it might possibly be in Havana somewhere or somewhere in Cuba. But I think it's a nice moment caught in a pose situation. The one thing that I often say when it comes to working with models or in pose situations is you kind of want it to be natural. And sometimes that sort of self-conscious look can be nice. I think in this instance, it works, but I would like to see something a little bit different as well. Um, but I can't get over the shadow. When I turn that over, it looks like a very sort of quiet bending over of this ballet dancer in that shadow. I'll let you kick in here, Derek. What are your thoughts on this one?
I'm perplexed by the shadow. I feel like we're back in one of those which color is the dress viral photos where I'm like, because I look at it and I'm like, wait, is it? And then I'm turning my head and I'm like, because it doesn't look like, I'm like, yeah,
Yeah,
it
let's
screws with
let's
your
just
mind, but
see
I
what
think that's so
happens. I mean,
cool.
can you imagine a picture like this, and what that does to it? Um, it's kind of crazy, kind
Yeah.
of interesting, but obviously the ballet and the shadow really reflects ballet. But when you see the full size image, it's a little bit different than that. It's very different from the shadow, and that's really kind of interesting. Pictures that ask questions oftentimes can be even more interesting. Let's flip that around one more time in the crop.
Even
That's
that.
kind of cool too.
Yeah, I like that.
Um,
And what I like about it, Steve, is that it does get away from what you said with like whenever you go in workshops, it's so hard sometimes to capture a moment that doesn't look like a workshop moment or that stands out from the rest of the images being taken. And I think this separates it. And of course, it removes it from the locale. When you have the full frame, you say, okay, Cuba, probably a workshop down in Cuba, working with some fixers, get some models or some dancers in and create these moments. But yeah, I like that. Really thinking outside the box with the various crops there. And it's like we talk about all the time, giving yourself options and working a scene and looking at things from different angles. So overall, it's a well taken shot. I do think, yes, I think especially when you're working with the workshops, I just want to double down on that part. Really try to stand apart from what everyone else is doing or from typical workshop photography. If it's something that you want to use for a portfolio, you really want to look for something else dynamic. A great time to try a new lens or try a new focal length. Maybe go really wide, or change your vantage point, get up on something, get down low on the ground, and really try to change your parameters of how you're shooting the scene.
Yeah, I mean, I do like the image. I really do. I
Yeah.
think, it works really well. Crop was a little detour that we took that, just to notice that sometimes if you pick up on it during the shoot, you can then begin to kind of focus on that. And I bet you, I don't know for a fact, but if there was more than one person involved, this may not necessarily be that case, but it does look like it was a situation where this model or this dancer is posing for the photographer. And I think, it's kind of mission accomplished for the shot that's there. The light is nice. The night light is nice on her. The little hair light, it looks all natural. The shadow itself is really nice in context with everything else. Um, but again, it's that sort of self-consciousness, in the expression. Whereas, that shadow really overpowered it just was so interesting. So let's continue on, Derek. Let's look at a couple of other sort of close-up scenarios. Let's look here. Let me just come back here, and we've got these two images. Let's just start with this one because it is a very sort of close-up shot, and again, I like the way it's framed. I like the background in terms of the reflection that's muted, and it makes for a more dynamic composition. Um, Nice sort of engagement with the photographer, kind of interesting. The color I think works. There's not a lot of color, just the beautiful red hats. Oh, excuse me. But that's kind of all that's there. The expression is engaging. At the same time, I'm not necessarily connecting with this person in a way that I kind of really understand. And for that, it's kind of leaving me just a little bit um, cold in terms of the image. And because it's a tight shot, it's really all about the person and the portrait that was taken. So, I mean, I think it's nice on a lot of levels, and I'm being sort of micro critiquing in the sense that, for me, the engagement is not as interesting as much as, a smile is something that can't be misinterpreted, and we all understand, and maybe it's not as evocative. In this instance, I'd like to see a smile maybe, or something that would connect me a little stronger to the person in the portrait.
Yeah, I think I just want to see more environment here. With like you said, you hit on something there, Steve, and it leaves you wanting something either more intent or gesture in the expression. And when you don't have that, you find yourself looking for something else. You want a reason to look at the image. You want a reason to dive in and kind of hypothesize what's going on or have some sense of the scene. And I think that's where photographing a little wider and making this into an environmental, it looks like you have a reflection in the back. Are they inside and there's a window looking out, or what's going on? There might be something else outside of the boundaries of this image that provides some interesting environment or just some more information.
Yeah, when the picture, we're going just from the image, and that's what we're sort of working on here. Now, if we are armed with some information about this person and there was something kind of interesting in terms of this person's experience, what they do, what happened, whatever, we're going to maybe look at this picture in a new way. But because it's a blank slate, I don't think that expression is necessarily compelling me all that much in terms of kind of what's going on. I think that's really what I'm reacting to because there's nothing sort of technically wrong. It's a nice light and all that stuff. I think too that, we're seeing a lot of environmental portraits, and because of that, sometimes the context can be particularly um, revealing or interesting, in terms of the image. Um, so then we'll move over to this image where obviously the photographer isolated this woman, sitting having a drink. Looks like there's someone there at the table, but the photographer was not as keen on that person. And I think when looking at this image, it is a little bit more evocative. You can see it in, both of those expressions, I think, are very telling. The guy's looking, hey, what's going on? He's barely in the frame. It's a bit of a rough crop of him, but he's there. The photographer included them. And I think as much as I'm always a little uncomfortable cropping kind of at the lips and the eye, it doesn't really work. But in order to kind of fit him in somehow, that's what they did. And it's a very kind of uncomfortable crop, but at the same time, that uncomfort, I think, extends to kind of the connection that's going on here. Not sure exactly what is happening, but there is a connection. The woman, you can see in her face, she's not, upset at all. This guy feels a little more upset. It's just it's kind of interesting, and I'm kind of writing my own story to this image. Maybe you are too, Derek. Won't delve into the sort of details of my story, but what are your thoughts on this one?
Well, first, I'm glad you pointed that out because I think that makes it makes images interesting when you can kind of take your mind and get creative and think about what the story is. I think that's part of the fun of street photography is we're all coexisting and all of us are doing something different, thinking something different at the same time. And I think that's kind of what's cool about taking pictures of random strangers is for people who are interested in the sociological aspect. You look at a moment like this and it's like, were they just having a drink at lunch or was it, like a, hey, they haven't seen each other in a long time? There's a million different directions you can go, which makes it interesting. I do like the tension of the face cut off for some reason in this image. And it's one of those hypocritical things that we always run into where it doesn't work in one image and the next image we fall in love with it. And I think it is the tension aspect of it. There's
Yeah.
enough face where you can see that he's giving the classic, what are you taking a picture of us for? Look, I've seen it many times through my lens. And I think what the last portrait missed, this one makes up for like double time because there's something about her eyes and her mouth is covered and her mouth is like the missing piece of the puzzle that would be like, is she intrigued? Is she wondering? Does she not care? I
I
think there's a
mean,
little more
yeah, I
with the
mean,
guy. It's a little more like, what are you doing? Why are
e-
we interesting?
exactly. I mean, the story, to me is, she looks a little bit bored with the guy she's with, and she's kind of looking at me, the viewer, or the photographer, in a way that, okay, maybe you'd be more interesting than this particular guy at the table. That's kind of what I'm getting. She's very calm, relaxed. She's not at all uncomfortable, which is kind of more you can say from the little sliver of the guy that we've got there. So, there's a lot of story going on in this image, and I think, as you mentioned, that may be a little bit what's missing from the previous one.
Yeah,
And
and it doesn't look rushed, Steve. It looks like a photo that they really just faced them off and looked at them. And I think that says something to me about the intent of the image, which intention and intent in images can make so much more impact in your when this is what they wanted and is what they wanted to get. Because like you said, we have a very limited idea of what was going on in the moment. But when you can tell an image was intentional, you start to look at things differently. You start to look at, okay, he's cropped off. Maybe it was an intentional decision, or, just little various factors that can play into how you're critiquing an image. A lot of it has to do with, well, why is it happening? There's I looked at some images from some of the greats, and an image that comes to mind from Can't even think who it was from. Was it Joel Meyerowitz? And it was slanted, and it was like, okay, well, it was off centered, or it was tilted, because if it were straight, it would lose an aspect of the image, and everything was kind of just fit in. And I'm like, okay. And I remember looking at the image, and it's like, okay, well, no, this looks very intentional because everything is pieced in. And if the horizon were corrected, things would be cut off and things wouldn't shape up the same. So I think intent does matter when you're looking at images.
Yeah, and what you said about, the idea that, yeah, we always say, hey, don't crop right at the lips and so on and so forth. Bottom line is, when we say don't, we say, oftentimes it doesn't work that well, which isn't to say, sometimes it might. And sometimes the image just feels right and you go with it. There are no rules. I think with experience, you gain confidence in making those decisions. I think, because we're critiquing here, we've had a certain experience and we're trying to articulate. I'm sure some people in the audience, are of that equal experience that can understand. And others, you just have to kind of keep at this. Eventually, your confidence will grow in terms of kind of what you do with the photographs that you make, and how you shoot them and how you enhance them and how you crop them. These two images feel like they might be from the same photographer. They're kind of street scenes in New York, most likely. And you can see kind of something going on. These strangers, as you said, capturing these strangers. The picture on the left, of course, has a lot of information because you've got this, poster that's up about oh my God, attempted murder of a NYC police officer. I mean, that's a pretty heavy thing. When you have pictures, and when you have pictures with words, you're always going to read them or try and read them. And certainly there's a lot to sort of read over here that the photographers included. In the context of New York, from an illustrative point of view, it's kind of interesting to me just because obviously uh, big cities, it has been said, have become a little bit less safe, or at least that's the kind of perception out there because of the news. We're New Yorkers, Derek, and you may or may not have noticed, but even we are kind of at the mercy of the perception. If we hear this stuff, we're gonna think about things when maybe we wouldn't have in the past. But I think, in this image, depending on kind of what the photographer is trying to do here, I think, by including that, it's a pretty big statement, I guess, that they're making. And certainly the body language of this shopper, with the Sephora bag, well dressed, the expression is really Times Square. There's a lot of information. It reminds me of my journalism days. The wire service guys would always try and get some sort of an icon in the image so that it would say New York or Los Angeles or whatever. This picture really does tell you a lot about where it is. And then the interesting thing is juxtaposition of the ad and this woman and the body language, the harshness of the lights and the high contrast of the scene. I think it's particularly effective, and because the image next to it is somewhat similar, it certainly seesaws the weight in my mind to this image if I had to choose one to represent those two pictures.
Yeah, and as I always talk about, I like information that can provide backstory and can place an image somewhere in time, because that's part of the historical aspect of an image, is one of the more weighted aspects of it, in my opinion. So you look at, we have a clear date that kind of, is gonna give or take provide a something of when this image was taken. Um, I recognize the image on the poster and know that, okay, that was a case of where a one of the recent migrants to New York City had robbed a store and pulled out a gun and ended up shooting at police, because that was a big news story. So it leans into a greater situation where now New York City has been kind of ground zero in the spotlight for people coming to this country, and sanctuary cities, and it wraps up in a whole current events kind of thing So you place that. You have the Times Square obviously behind. And then I always think it's interesting to see ads from the time. So you have the ad in the top right corner. The Sephora bag pairs perfectly with the white stripes in the crosswalk. So that's kind of like anytime you have a little ironic pairing there. So all this information just kind of plays in to me. In the image on the right, the part that sells it for me is the faces, how those faces just
Mm.
pair up with one another on the right side. And obviously you have the guy on the left with just again, it's that what that one portrait was missing. There's just really that locked on eye contact, and it pairs so well with the fast fashion ad behind.
Mm. Yeah, and when we take off the wanted poster and we see these two images together, in some ways, from an artistic point of view, it might be a stronger choice if it's the same work of the same photographer. Only that, the fact that that poster is there kind of hijacks that image and makes it something of a poster, if I shall borrow the element that's in the photo, a poster for sort of New York and kind of what's going on. Whereas, the pictures that kind of leave you, questioning the idea of the real people and the ads behind, juxtaposition, the heads. It's kind of an interesting series developing here. And maybe if the original cropping was left, that picture just becomes too heavy in the series and takes too much of the spotlight away from the series. So, sometimes it's not that you want to, sometimes you have to take one for the team when you're thinking about images that are part of a set. Sometimes an image is still strong and might even be stronger, but because you're including it as part of a series for this exhibition or book or story, you decide to kind of take out that element just because it's a better fit for the walk through all the images that you're going to sort of show off. So, interesting, when you look at the expressions that we were compelled by, and then the expressions that we were sort of kind of less compelled by. Very different pictures, no criticism to the images themselves, other than how important, that moment that you capture in a portrait really is. And I think, this next image for me kind of illustrates that a little bit in that obviously kind of a high angle looking down, very simple. But for me, it's these expressions. I mean, it looks like a mother and daughter. They look like kind of the same person with the same expression. I really feel, something. I feel the connection there. I feel the human connection. I kind of feel for them. I'm thinking to myself, my own baggage is that, they're beautiful, but it's difficult. I mean, that's what it feels for me. But beautiful, soft expressions that to me are very compelling that I'm reacting to.
Yeah, it is nice. I want a little breathing room. I think for me it feels a little claustrophobic on the edges, and especially when you have something like that light cutting through. Maybe add a little bit of space, a little breathing room to see where that light streak goes. I want to see what's again environment. I think environment is so important. Um, Even if I think people have to expand their what they're willing to accept in images sometimes. We want the perfect moment. We see the perfect street scene and there's a current car parked on the curb and we kind of lose our minds. We're like, oh, it's not like we wanted. We wanted something timeless. And I think we need to do more of looking at images from a 20, 30 years down the line perspective where you're going to wish down the line you had more information. You're going to wish you had a little more scene because you can always crop down. But when you have more scene, it's more information. It tells you more of a story. It's a challenge sometimes. There might be something right out of this frame that caused the photographer to crop down into that square frame and to keep it really tight. But sometimes we think that something is distracting or it doesn't fit, but the viewer doesn't even their eye doesn't even go there. Sometimes it is a distraction, and we do want to pay attention to that. I'm not saying it's an all or nothing, black or white kind of case, but sometimes you have to, take a photo like that, shoot a little wider, get some stuff in there, wait it out. You might get someone that, a pair of legs that walks behind them, and you just have a pair of legs that fills the negative space, but provides breathing room. So when I talk about, you know, having stuff fill the frame, it doesn't have to be perfect and it doesn't have to be completely right or something that really fits into what the subject of the image is. Sometimes one thing allows another thing. So in that case, someone walking by, a pair of legs, a pair of feet, something in the background, it's just going to allow you to open up the frame a little bit and provide breathing room for your subject while not distracting.
Yeah, I
The
don't,
Yeah, go
yeah,
ahead, Steve.
yeah, I don't think necessarily that, I potentially could agree with everything that you said. Just to play devil's advocate, the tightness of the crop for me can be a positive in the sense, in terms of the baggage that I bring to it. Obviously, it's a careful cropping. There's enough space around the bag here and around the child here, so there's room there. It's not a severe crop in the sense that you're cropping into anything.
Mm.
The fact that it is a fairly tight crop, I think for me personally, gives me a sense of uh, uh, kind of trappedness in the sense, and it's my own baggage that I'm bringing to it. But I'm just sort of looking at them, going, they're looking up in a way that's very wanting. I mean, I'm assuming that maybe she's selling her wares, and the more she sells, the better it's going to be for the family. But the fact that it is such a sort of tight box they're kind of in makes it even more compelling in terms of those expressions that they can't get out, so to speak. Not that they necessarily want to, but I'm sort of reading some positive into that kind of constraint feel of the crop. And I would probably not say that if this purse was cropped or if it was any tighter than it is. But from that perspective, I'm looking all the way around and it's tight, but maybe that's okay. So,
Mhm. And one other thing I want to bring up
oh
while
yeah,
we're on that one real
yeah,
quick.
yeah,
It gets a little muddy in the shadows if you look at the skin tones. Don't
yeah,
be afraid to bump up the exposure. I think this with the exposure bumped up maybe two-thirds of a stop even would really help this out.
yeah.
Sometimes, and I'm not, I'm just projecting here. This may not be the case, but sometimes we're so afraid of seeing a highlight clipped that, we freak out or we underexpose everything because we can't have a single highlight clipped. And there might be really bright areas that aren't even going to make a difference. I've blown out skies if it means exposing right for my subjects. Um, so in this, I just get a little bit of a muddiness and almost like a little bit of like too much clarity. It comes off a little too where if you have details that are softer and you bump up the clarity, it doesn't sharpen up the frame. It's like taking a cartoon outline that is drawn with a thin black pen and it just goes over
Mm,
it with a black Sharpie marker. So sometimes we want to stay away from that and just keep it a little softer. I don't know if it's just my view of it, but if you
mm,
kind of pull back, sometimes when a little trick that I use when I look at some of my images, if I'm in doubt, is I squint my eyes. And when you squint your eyes, sometimes things will jump out and they'll be more glaring. So that's just something that I use and that I see. Again, it's seasoned to taste. This is just one opinion among hundreds of millions out there.
mm. Yeah, and we're about to sort of get into a series of images that can be kind of very complex. Again, we're talking about I guess street and travel work in the next few images, and we'll start off at the museum with this image here, and I kind of really like it in the sense that I enjoy photographing in museum, although I often don't have the patience to stay long enough to wait for those really great moments that Elliot Erwitt always seemed to have the patience to be able to get. Um, it can be very interesting to photograph in a museum. The space is beautifully visually curated, made for photography, and then it's up to us to kind of find if it's not just the exhibit that we're photographing, but a juxtaposition that somehow makes sense in terms of the art and the people that are going to be reached by it. So here we have some artwork, a couple of people looking, and I kind of like the composition of the placement of these two gentlemen within the frame. Obviously, a phone being recording, we see that a lot, but in this instance, we get what's happening there, and a little bit of the how the like pets look like their owners and viewers look like the art that they're looking at. So you got that, on the gentleman on the right.
Yeah, you hit a point for me is whenever there's juxtaposition or there's some irony worked in the frame. I think it works a lot more successfully when you have an image like this, where you're taking the art and the art is taking a back seat to the art that you're creating or to the viewer. But this, nonetheless, I mean, I just think this is an interesting sign of the times kind of photo that, again, you look at it with the 20 years later glasses and it plays completely differently. We're in a world now where everyone pulls their phone up and they capture art, they share it, they show where they're at. And I look at it in that regard. I think some things I treat on a tighter set of criterion. This is something that, yeah, there's a lot of ways to make it better. You look at the bottom right corner and it's kind of off kilter where it's from an angle and that can kind of pull you. And then you see that little bit of framing down in the bottom and see how when you open it up full, Steve.
Oh yeah.
And it's like, there you go. And it's like just all that little stuff down at the bottom where it's like, okay, if I came in and I walk 5 feet to the right and I get more of the piece of art and what they're looking at, or if I come up a little closer and I focus on the phone, again, working the scene, working different angles, trying to find like that right there looks great. It gets rid of a little bit of the distraction on the outer edges. But yeah, just again, as you see in a lot of the critiques we do, Steve, it's just little details, little things here, a minor change, a shift over a couple feet, or a little bit of a crop in.
Yeah, and the next two shots I wanted to talk about. Let me just deselect here, just because they're the kind of thing that I'm always looking at. It's not an easy thing to capture so much that's happening in these pictures. And when I first looked at this picture, I almost kind of thought, is this sort of a composite? It looks obviously it's some sort of a I don't want to say demonstration, but yeah, maybe demonstration, obviously Ukraine and so on. But when you look at this and all these signs and all the people and all the looking in different directions, it's just kind of head spinning a little bit in my mind compared to a lot of images that I see of this ilk. In that, there's kind of a movement that's going on. There's this sort of circular, triangular composition with her in the center. This guy, this person. I mean, there's so many signs. There's so much going on. Color aside, enhancement aside, just looking at the bones of the image, I'm thinking, organized chaos, click. Not an easy thing to do, but I think that's what was accomplished, with this picture.
Yeah, definitely. And if you go back to the other image and you just kind of compare these, there's a clear difference in the processing that jumps out. And you don't want the processing to be the star. If it's something that you're going for, again, everybody has personal taste, but sometimes you can take a frame. This is, look, it looks like a classic Little Italy San Gennaro Festival scene. Um, and when you get into that, again, that clarity, and you just because the best way to spot clarity, whether it's overdone or not, in my opinion, is to look at an out of focus area. Look at a person that's out of focus. You shouldn't have much detail to somebody that's out of focus because what the clarity does is it tries to inject detail into an area that doesn't have much detail. So that's kind of a good. I look at the cop, and if you were to take Steve, pull up a clarity slider and just drag it to the left to kind of suck some of the clarity out of here, and then bring the saturation down.
Yeah, I think this picture is probably too far gone to really.
Yeah,
You need the
just
original. But
yeah,
yeah,
we
no
need the
question
original.
about that. No question about that.
Yeah. So and I think my point just being if you go back to the other image,
Oh, sorry.
no, that's all right.
To
Have at
to
it.
the other one. Yeah. Okay.
If you go back to the other image, you're able to just dive into the image and focus on it. And you know what? It needs some massaging in post as well to really pop the colors and the contrast. But even just a flat, straight out of camera image, um, it's it's still if it were shot photojournalistically, where it's just very straight to how it was. Steve, you know more about that than I do. It really puts the focus on the moment. The black and white even looks great, and it's one of those
Mm.
things where again, color can be distracting, or color can enhance an image. In this frame, obviously, we recognize, especially in this generation, the blue and the yellow of the Ukrainian flag.
Mm.
So that stands out. I didn't think the black and white was going to impact me as much, but I actually did like the black and white, even though we lose those colors that are instantly recognizable.
Yeah. I
It
mean,
still is a nice frame.
yeah, black and white, can be powerful once you commit to it. And sometimes you do commit to it, even though, as Derek mentioned about the Ukrainian colors, it's just subconsciously in our minds these days. But if you're doing a black and white series, it's still going to deliver. The main thing about these two, the main thing about these two pictures that let me just go fix that a little bit. The main thing I wanted to say was that processing aside, with this image, no doubt it's overdone, but it almost feels as if all these chess pieces were pasted in. That's part of it. I don't think that's the case. I think what struck me, and let's just keep the processing aside, is that again the sort of organized chaos of so many chess pieces within the frame that works so well in this one also kind of works well in this one to the point that you're looking around here and they're not perfect flattering moments necessarily, but there's a lot going on in this image. And to get an image with all these things happening, I mean, I don't know, maybe it is some sort of a compilation of images, but it's somehow for me pretty compelling to see this grand stage with all the actors in it. I get a sense of that. And to capture this kind of moment organized in this way, as imperfect as it is, it's still for me pretty compelling. And that's why I thought, these two images by the same photographer were good sort of things to look at and sort of how do you do that? Well, you kind of have to get really in there and you got to be patient and you got to shoot a lot of frames and hope that, trigger on instinct and hope that you get one where things are organized. So,
Well said.
yeah, let's keep moving on here. Here we have another fairly high contrast scene. Again, where the processing potentially is a little bit getting in the way in the sense that it's all about these signs, and then you've also got some people in there, but there's not necessarily a lot of detail in it's a very highly contrasty image, uh, kind of overdone a little bit. But we'll go to black and white just to get a sense of what it is. So, I mean, obviously, your eyes sort of are living in the sort of top two-thirds of the frame, and then you've got this stuff going on. It's kind of interesting in terms of the signs. It's really all about the signs, and then there's people going on. But I would argue to say that, again, just like we saw this sort of organized chaos that seemed to work, here maybe the organized chaos is not quite as compelling. And the fact that things are so dark, like I guess that's the back of a head, but it's so black, it's really a little bit hard to say that this part of the frame, which is integral to the composition, is a little bit lost, at least in this technical version of the image. But beyond that, I do like the composition of this. If anything, maybe I'm just looking, I don't know, I find that a little bit ugly up there, this thing here. So maybe I'd come down a little bit. But yeah, that's what I'd say. Again, it's an over processed thing. But looking at the composition's interesting. I think if there was a technical fix, we'd be able to kind of talk more about what this image is and what it can be.
Yeah, definitely. The one thing I'll add to it is this is a perfect opportunity in looking for that irony, that juxtaposition that we look for in found images out in the wild, if you will. Fresh restrooms.
Mhm.
Not too many public restrooms or restrooms anywhere outside of the home would be considered fresh restrooms. So I think that's an interesting chance to play with an expression. And if you have the time to kind of wait it out and get closer, cut out everything else except those two signs, wait for a nice face to fill the gap. And this is the kind of thinking that we keep talking about in seeing the scene and really saying, how can I take this and make this more dynamic? What do I have at my disposal? What can I work with? What can I play with? What can possibly occur that I might want to wait around for that can take this image to another level? And we don't always have the time, but I think that's what makes us better photographers is learning to see better. It has nothing to do with anything that goes on within the camera. It's about what happens before and with what we notice and what we realize that, hey, I have this at my disposal. This would be really cool if somebody walked in here and I see that steady stream of people is coming in here. So, okay, I have a great chance that I won't have to wait long before I get the right thing. And you wait it out a little bit. But if you don't have the idea, if you don't have the foresight, you can't put together the photo. So, yeah, I mean, this image for me, it's almost it loses something for me on the right side of the frame. Something's just not sitting right. You have the left side of the frame that lighting is pretty distracting for me because you have it. It's kind of a leading line, and it brings my eye up to nowhere. And then that actually helps a little bit when you take away the right side. There was just so much negative space on the right side that really wasn't adding to the frame, that it actually makes the leading line of the lights a little less egregious for me. But yeah, just
Mhm.
technically there's the stuff you talked about, Steve. But yeah, this is a perfect opportunity for this person to really play around with this. You have a lot working with it.
Yeah, I mean, I like what's going on there. I love this sort of this little window here, which is a picture onto a picture. If you
Mhm.
reminds me a little, I always go back to the Robert Frank image of the New Orleans streetcar, where every reflection or every window is kind of an interesting little photo unto itself. When you look at this window, it looks like kind of a roller coaster of neon. There's a face there. I think maybe it needs to be a little more curated. Maybe there's a way to kind of come in and focus on this kind of thing and see kind of what that might provide. But and then the other thing, when you said fresh restrooms, it immediately reminded me of my time in Tokyo. So you just have to Google Japanese bathroom and you realize, yeah, that's a time or place where you don't mind spending more time in a bathroom. But let's move on. We've got a lot of images to get to. And then we have this image. And, again, I like images that have a lot of stuff happening. And, it's kind of hard to do. And, perfection is overrated. Maybe it's not perfect. And maybe this guy probably does not appreciate that moment caught by the photographer. Maybe it's not his best foot forward, but, obviously the star here is this gentleman with the baby kind of pointing to something. I kind of like the light and what's happening here. This can be construed as maybe a little bit humorous. Um, Obviously he might be selling stuff, but he's got to eat as well. So there's a lot happening, and again, pictures don't always work on their own. They're part of a series by the photographer. So I'm intrigued on seeing how the photographer deals with the world in looking at an image like this, which I think has some nice things going for it. And I'll leave it. I'm curious to hear what you have to say.
I am on the same wavelength as you. I love when there's a lot going on in an image. I love when things just kind of piece together. The guy on the obviously your hand goes right to the guy in the middle, like you said, the finger pointing, great gesture. And it just so happens that the person or the direction he's pointing in, he's not pointing to the
Yeah.
guy, but the direction in which he's pointing has like that caught off guard, like caught with the hand in the cookie jar, eating the food. You have all the food over there. Again, information. Maybe I read too deep into images, but I love little things like the Nutella and the Skippy. It's recognizable, and you have it with some other stuff there, some other products that aren't recognizable to me. So it's kind of like a mix of cultures, and
Mm.
it again it adds information that says what's international, what's not. Some things that we think are part of one culture, are part of many cultures, and I think all those little details are what add to certain images. There's a lot going on here. And even I'm gonna say it because I'm notorious for pulling up my skew tool, and there's a little sliver on the right hand side. And when you have it in color, there's a little bit of green there. And I don't mind it. That's something that would normally be like, all right, distracting, it's on the edge of the frame. But in images that are nicely composed and nicely stacked, I think this is a nicely stacked image that kind of just takes your eye on a trip around. And I don't necessarily mind having that little bit of that doorway there because it adds to the intrigue of there's a door there. It makes me want to know, where does that door lead to? What is this place? Where are they? Is that a home? Is that a shop? What is that screen that's in the doorway? Does that give me more information? So I think when you execute in a way that draws people into the photo, you want more. You're gonna overlook things that might stand out or be distracting in another image, but when you do certain things right, you really start to look, and I want to look at every little piece, of information and every little detail. Going back to the highlight discussion, that modern bulb up there, again, it's information. It tells us about the time. It's interesting. You have like this, it looks like a foreign country, a photo from a foreign country, and people are always like, okay, well, Americans, we look at everything as like, okay, in certain countries, it's like taking a step back in time. And then you have the little daylight balanced spiral bulb that's just kind of interesting. These little details like that it dates it to a certain period. And to double down on the highlight thing from one of the previous images we discussed, that bulb, yes, it's completely blown out. It's a light bulb. It should be completely blown out. And sometimes, in speaking with that earlier image, we get into a thing where it's like, okay, well, we can't have anything blown out. We can't have any highlights blown out. We can't have anything glaring. Yes, is it glaring? Yes, but what would be more glaring is if we tried to bring the highlights down too much in that bulb, and now it's gray when we know it's not gray, and now our eyes going to be drawn to, okay, now the white, the white level isn't sitting right. So I just wanted to point that out. I know that was a bit wordy, but that's a perfect example of the discussion of making sure that, how do you want the balance of the exposure, and how do you want things to sit? Don't be afraid of, certain things should be a little on the hot side. Certain things should be underexposed. We don't need to have this dynamic range mentality where everything needs to fall in the middle. But very nice frame.
Yeah, speaking of light bulbs blowing out, I don't know if you saw my ring light just went out in the middle of that. So, but it's okay. I still, my
Planned.
beauty light, my beauty still shines through. The one thing I would say is, it's interesting when you look at this as a color image, because of course there's a lot of very vibrant color, not only the pink of the young child, but the jams and the Skippy and the Nutella. But when you convert it to black and white, kind of watch what happens. I think now it's just the players and this guy. The condiments take a bit of a back seat. And in some ways, again, as we've often said, content is amplified sometimes in black and white. So in order for color to amplify the content, I think you have to kind of selectively work this image so that when you look at it for the first time, you sort of see kind of the pointing and this guy and the fun and the environment. I think part of it is the enhancement. And one way is to kind of desaturate certain colors. I'm doing it globally now, but you can definitely come in and make certain colors a little bit less if color is your thing, and that was kind of what you wanted to do. So we've got a couple more images here. This one, they look like they're kind of street images. I'm just kind of bringing up some of the shadows just so that it's a little bit easier to see. Now this one, I don't know, but it certainly fits with some of the other ones that we saw earlier. I wonder, it would not surprise me to know it's the same photographer. So if it is, we won't spend that much time on it because we've already talked a little bit, but very effective. I think it works, in the same ways we talked about the earlier images working. The juxtaposition of the people in the foreground, the fact that the people, the physical proximity of the photographer to the people is really close, and that brings us in. We're right there in the middle of the action in Times Square, and I just happen to love this particular shadowy figure here that kind of is mimicked by the person that's caught off frame. I can see Daryl thinking the same way, and it's very effective. It works. So maybe briefly, if you wanted to add, and then we'll move to the next one.
I second everything you said. You tied it up
Okay.
perfectly.
Okay, great. Well, let's look at this next one. And this next one, it's also kind of a moment, but it's when I say intimate moment, I mean the photographer's right there. He's kind of, or she's right in close proximity. You can sort of tell that it's not like a telephoto lens. You have a more three-dimensional quality when you're physically close, but it's not wide enough a lens where you've got some distortion. And I think it's a little bit of a fun moment. I'm not sure what this woman is reacting to, whether it's the photographer, who's aimed in that direction. I like both hands kind of mimicking, doing kind of the same thing, and the very sort of angelic looks of these other kids in the background. So I think it works. Did you want to add something to
Yeah,
this
definitely.
one?
I think it would benefit when you have one side of the frame stacked closer and you have a lot going on, and you have, especially when you have like a limb cut off or something cut off that fits in with the scene, and then you have a wider gap on the other side. Yeah, you can crop it in. And for me, I kind of want to take away some of that because this is another example. I feel like I'm on a theme here. Um, the brightest part of the photo. Again, now you have a light bulb that, because you have that dead space there, that light bulb and it's a little larger. That light bulb is distracting, whereas I wasn't distracted by the light bulb in
Mm,
the photo from 2 frames ago. So again, it's one of those things where it's like sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't. You can kick and scream and complain about it, but we all do it. And it's just a matter of what else is going on in the frame. When I have
mhm,
that arm on the left there, it tells me that, I'm looking at this and my brain is processing it that, okay, it looks like it's empty to the right side of the frame. There's not much going on over there. I want to take the camera and I want to turn it to the left and I want to see what else is going on over there. Um, so having, sometimes it's just about balance. You can't go on rules. Sometimes you have to throw out centering and you have to throw out the rule of thirds, and you have to just look at the frame and say, okay, does this look right? This is my brain pulling my eye somewhere it shouldn't be, or does something just feel a little bit off? And that's where you want to dive deeper and go into your composition more. Maybe, turn the camera, change your angle.
mm. Yeah, sorry. Well, I see we're butting up against the end of the
Yes.
show. We'll maybe look at these last few images. You can see that they have some things in common. We'll save the one on the left for last because maybe there's more going on there. Whereas these images here are all about kind of the rhythm of the lines, etc. And it's just fun. I know you, I know I think the viewers generally, appreciate shadows and reflections in a way that works. The patterns, the geometry of it all, the picture on the right. I really like what's going on there. Maybe I'd like to see a little bit more on the top. I don't know kind of what was there. But obviously all the reflections were captured, but maybe just a little bit more of the chairs on the top to complete the symmetry of this. It's a little bit tense when you crop off the top there, but maybe it's for good reason. But I like what's going on with this one. With this one, a little bit less. There's a lot of lines. Look, I think that many of us, maybe it's not our main pursuit, but we all appreciate the incredible architecture that's all around us, wherever you might be. And when it comes to these kinds of shots, I think the bar is raised in the sense that there's all kinds of great light and lines and geometry in these apartments or in these buildings that we see. And this one, for me, is good. But it's also a little bit distorted. My first thing would be maybe to see what the transform button would do just to straighten it out a little. Now, obviously, it doesn't straighten it, but you can work with it. It's kind of cool. I like to see more of this kind of thing. But as an image on its own, I find that if I had to compare with the this one, and there's similar kinds of images, I like the chair one. ahead. Before we look at the last one, did you want to throw something in on
Yeah,
this?
that left is kind of trippy, man. I like
Mm.
it.
Oh, you
No,
do?
I do
Okay.
like I do like it.
Mm.
I love
Yeah.
architecture though, so I'm biased.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
yeah,
No, no, absolutely.
buildings get very tricky sometimes with, if you square them up with the perspective tool, sometimes it takes it as if you're looking at it head on when, from 20 stories up when you're really on the street level, and it makes it look weird and it stretches things out. So
Mm.
be careful when you guys do that. But I like the other image as well. And I think they both for different reasons.
Mhm.
They're two different types of images. The image on the right is something that I probably would walk by and not see. Shadows make things super interesting. So sometimes it's all about the right time of day. If you had that same perspective on an overcast day, you wouldn't get the same image because the shadows wouldn't be there. And I think that's what makes it. I actually like that right there. Flipped around.
Yeah.
So
Sorry to
again,
take you
it's now it's cool to
on
just
that
I love
psychedelic
when
trip.
when you are doing stuff like this while because I'm
Yeah.
seeing different things, and I think that's the essence of everything we do as we start to wrap this up, Steve, is we're really, what are we trying to do? We're trying to make people better visionaries. We're trying to make them see more and think about more different different perspectives. Make Instead of going back and look at images after the fact, we want people to think about these things while they're out there or recognize certain things. And as we flip things around, sometimes it's has nothing to do with what we see or what we don't see. We capture
Mhm.
something, and sometimes you just got to play around with it and change the perspective up in the post process.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's all about figuring out kind of how to make the most out of everything that we're trying to say with our photographs. So we'll end on this one. It's a really interesting mural. And again, the photographer set it up and then went to work waiting, the way Sam Abel describes oftentimes what his father taught him as a photographer. And I think, once you have a great kind of mural like that, you're piggybacking on the artist that created it. And you don't, it's instantly kind of understood, even though specifically maybe I don't know what's going on there, but it's pretty compelling mural and pretty simple. And then the photographer is waiting to for the chess pieces to kind of form something similar to the artist's composition of the mural in the background. And I think it's
Yes.
pretty successful. Maybe you're always looking for nirvana. You're looking for that perfection, and nothing is. I like the way this one person on the right is kind of looking up at the person, the only person in this painting in the background, and everybody else is just kind of going about their business. Yeah, just like you said last week, there was that the guy jumping. Remember that shot? There was someone right behind him. Well, here, yeah, there. It would be nice if these people behind this person was a little bit more separating, but it's not always possible. And maybe this was the best possible version of this shot. I still think it's strong. I would probably, you're probably going to say, let's straighten it out somehow a little bit.
I already know this is Bowery Mural, so
Oh, okay.
it's tricky because Bowery mural, you have to decide, you have to pay attention to how you're going to square it up because the mural itself is actually not squared with the curb.
Gotcha.
So it's always going to be a little off kilter.
Yeah, yeah. What are your thoughts? I mean, it's a strong mural, and I think a strong depiction of it. Uh, people going by.
Yeah.
And,
Cup.
is there something better? I don't know. I haven't seen anything better. Maybe if we go and we wait longer time, there'll be something even more interesting. Chances are that's always the case. If this thing's going to be there, you can go there every day and maybe do a series of people walking by where the pictures themselves become the lines that eventually get crossed off before you get to that final image that's the person behind the bars.
Yeah. So a little interesting historical context. Again, sometimes context can add to an image. This is a Banksy piece
Oh,
that
okay.
was up. So this was, it's somehow politically motivated. There was something political prisoner, some kind of thing that there was the why it is the way it is. But it'll start to make sense. I don't know the historical or the political and social
I
context
wonder
of
if it
it, but
has anything to do with sort of reproductive rights and all that kind of thing.
yeah, it's something to do. It's some
Mm.
either a political prisoner being locked up or something. It's something along that
Yeah,
lines. But it is a
yeah.
Banksy piece. This is a Bowery mural, which for those who are not from New York City or who don't know about Bowery mural, it's always been covered up. It's you have some of the top muralists and graffiti artists in the world who put pieces up here. Optimo, who's a New York City artist, has owned this piece or has owned this wall for the last couple of years, just putting up some huge murals and redoing them, and then people will come up and they'll tag over them. And so it's actually pretty interesting because this is constantly changing this
Mm.
mural. So again, when we talk about historical context, any given photo, anytime you walk by Bowery mural, if you want to capture it, capture a piece of history, just take a photo of it because it's so quickly changes from one thing to the next that any given day it could be different from day to day to day. You're gonna have somebody that'll go up and throw a tag up on it. Um, yeah, so there's a lot of history there, and for people who are really interested in graffiti and New York City graffiti scene in particular, Futuro, who is an early graffiti artist and one of the most iconic New York street artists, actually has a tag on the backside of this wall that you can't access. There's a door that they've since closed up, but it still exists on the backside of this wall. So the more you
Mm.
know. But this just an example of one simple image can add so much. I won't dive into the technical aspect of it, Steve. I think you hit the nail on the head. You know, we can get closer. This looks like it was taken from the median. You can get closer and kind of have some fun with it. You know that people are going to stop and look at it, and they're going to, all the time it happens at this mural, especially on a piece like this. They're going to stop, they're going to look up, they're going to take it in for a moment. And that gives you a good opportunity to work a single person into the frame and play around with your angles.
Mhm. Yeah, it's a very strong background that in order to sort of live up to the strength of that background, it's incumbent on the photographer to really maybe spend the time to get something good like this, which I like. But I also think there's some other possibilities. Spending more time here might yield even something stronger than this one. So
Yeah.
you don't know until you try. So thanks, everybody. Thank you, Derek. Thank you, Lassie, for the opportunity to do this. We've been doing kind of at least on a weekly basis, it seems, in the last few shows. And thank you, photoeducate.com, where I do my workshops. I'm heading to Milan on Friday. Derek, I'll
Nice.
bring you back some spaghetti
There
bolognese.
you go. My
We have
favorite.
one spot left if anyone wants to come. David Brommer is going to be coming along for that ride, so that will be
Wonderful.
fun. And yeah, so that's all we got to say for this week, unfortunately. But we'll continue with the next show. There's a lot of great submissions. Keep sending them in, you guys. We keep downloading more and more great work, and our hope is to get to everything. So be patient. If yours isn't talked about yet, it likely will be.
Yes, definitely. This Steve's not going anywhere unless he kicks us to the curb. So keep sending them in. I know we have had some people who are new to watching this and also first time critique submitters. So definitely will get to your images. We like to just take our time, and we're getting better, Steve. We're working at sometimes, and we take your critiques into consideration. We try not to over bloviate on the same stuff over and over or beat a dead horse, but keep sending the images in. We'll get to them as long as Steve will continue to join us on the program, which we hope will be a very long time.
Well, thank you very much, Derek. And I'm going to get my dictionary out to check out over bloviate. That's a great word. Thank you for that one.
I don't
I
know
know
if
exactly what you're saying.
bloviate is a word. I think over we might have to. There might be a hyphenated.
Okay, well, if we were
They
playing
might strip my
Scrabble,
English degree.
I would go to the judges, but I get what you're saying. So anyway, we'll look forward to the next one.
There we go. Until next time, huge thank you to the passionate photographer himself and to all of our viewers out there for submitting another edition of the B&H Event Space now in the books. Catch y'all next time.